Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we have a deep dive that I think is going to really catch you off guard in the best way possible. Reading historical text by the 19th century preacher Charles Spurgeon.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one.
It really is. It's a sermon titled Heaven's Nurse Children, and it's based on just a single short verse from the ancient prophets, Hosea chapter 11, verse 3.
Right.
And the reason we are doing this deep dive is because it gives us this diagnostic landscape of the human soul that feels entirely counterintuitive to how we normally categorize divine authority.
Yeah, I mean, we are pulling this from Metropolitan Tabernacle Pulpit Volume 17 for those keeping track.
Yeah.
But what's so striking here is that the text takes all our standard assumptions about how the Creator interacts with humanity and it just flips them upside down.
Totally.
And you have to remember, the book of Hosea itself is already a pretty shocking piece of literature. I mean, the prophet is instructed to marry a woman who will be unfaithful to him.
Gomer.
Yeah, Gomer. So he's living out this agonizing, breathing metaphor for God's relationship with a wayward people. But then against that backdrop of, spiritual adultery and judgment, chapter 11 shifts into this entirely different tone.
It's wild because when most people imagine the creator of the universe, the imagery that comes to mind is usually massive, right? Distant, intimidating.
Oh, for sure. Very detached.
Yeah, like a cosmic watchmaker, completely detached from the tiny little springs and gears he set into motion. Or maybe we picture a judge in a towering courtroom or a king leading an army. The metaphors are always built around sheer scale and absolute authority.
Which is what makes Hosea 11 so jarring, because it brings a radically different picture right into the foreground. Instead of a distant deity or this towering judge, the text presents the creator of the cosmos acting as a tender nurse.
A nurse.
Yeah. We are talking about a very domestic, intimate scene here. A nurse holding a wobbly, stumbling toddler by the arms, patiently teaching them how to walk.
Which is such a crazy visual.
I taught Ephraim also to go, taking them by their arms. That is the phrase Spurgeon locks onto here. Ephraim being, poetic name for the nation of Israel.
Right.
And it is this vivid image of divine condescension, but not in a patronizing way.
Like sneering down at them.
No, it's stooping down to the level of the weak.
It's like getting down on your knees on the living room rug, so you're right at eye level with the child.
It's so personal.
Yeah.
So the progression of our discussion today, we're going to follow Spurgeon's thematic outline here.
Which is brilliant, by the way.
It is. We will start way back in the ancient cosmic decrees of electing grace. Then we will move through the historical exodus of Israel out of Egypt, kind of watching how this divine nursing played out on a national scale.
Yeah.
And finally, we will look at the intensely personal day-to-day stumbles of the individual believer. So bring it right down to you, the listener.
So to start, Spurgeon calls the opening of Hosea 11 a casket unspeakably precious.
Like a jewelry box. Like a jewelry box, yeah. He argues that every single line in the chapter is a rare jewel, and they're all linked together in this chain of mercies. But the very first jewel he pulls out of this box is ancient, sovereign, electing love.
The text says, when Israel was a child, then I loved him.
Yes. And he calls this electing love the mother of mercies. He compares it to the golden sanded river that had its rise in Eden, right? Branching off into many streams to water the entire garden. Because before you can even discuss the daily care of the nurse, you have to establish the origin of the relationship itself.
Right. Where did it come from?
Exactly. God chose Israel not because they were some massive, impressive empire.
Yeah.
I mean, he chose them when they were little, despised, and literally enslaved in Egypt.
It makes me think about an underground spring.
Oh, sure.
Like you might be walking through a really dry, arid valley, and suddenly you come across a pool of crystal clear water bubbling up to the surface. And that visible water is the adoption, the sonship, the daily provision we actually experience and feel. But the only reason that pool exists on the surface at all is because of the hidden underground spring.
It's a source.
Yeah, the massive aquifer of water beneath the rock that has been there for centuries, completely out of sight.
That is a great way to look at it. That underlying aquifer is electing grace. It's this differentiating free grace that wrote the name of Israel upon Jehovah's heart long before they ever took a single step.
Wow.
And that changes the entire dynamic of the relationship.
Well, let me ask you this then. How does grasping that ancient electing love change the way you view your current standing? Like for the listener right now, does knowing about that underground aquifer eliminate the anxiety of having to constantly earn that affection?
I mean, it has to, right? Think about it. If the affection was based on performance, if God only loved Israel once they proved they could walk perfectly without stumbling, the relationship would be incredibly fragile.
You'd be terrified all the time.
You would wake up every single day, terrified that one misstep would sever the bond completely. But if the love predates the performance, if it was established when you were helpless, the foundation is completely secure.
Because the choice was made when the child was entirely incapable.
Yes, the affection does not fluctuate based on the daily success or failure of a toddler who's just learning to walk.
And Spurgeon uses this wild contrast to explain the dignity of this adoption. I love this part. He says, becoming a child of God is a dignity to which the descent of an imperial prince bears no more comparison than a spark in the tinder to the sun in the heavens.
The scale of that comparison is just massive.
Right, a spark in the tinder.
Because a spark in the tinder is entirely dependent on external friction.
Right, you strike a flint.
Yeah, and it glows for a fraction of a second, consumes its tiny little fuel source, and vanishes. So human royalty, earthly status, the most magnificent emperor you can think of, they are momentary. They're sparks.
But the sun.
The sun in the heavens is a massive, self-sustaining inferno burning for millennia. The gap between the greatest human king and the poorest, most stumbling child of God is wider than the gap between that tiny spark and the budding sun.
That is so encouraging.
It elevates human dust and ashes above the angels. I mean, the angels are described as servants, as messengers, but humans who were actually enslaved to sin are brought in as sons and heirs.
And because we are adopted, because that underground spring of love is there, we are not left in bondage. The decree of love leads directly into action.
Right, the next phrase.
Yeah, the text in Hosea says, I called my son out of Egypt. Now, Spurgeon is careful to point out that this is not a universal generic invitation.
It's not a flyer on a bulletin board.
No. It is not God standing at the border of Egypt with a megaphone, just hoping some of the slaves decide to wander out on their own. He calls it a persuasive, convincing, conquering call.
Which is where people usually start to push back.
Right, because conquering sounds hostile. It sounds like a violation of the human will.
Like divine kidnapping.
Yeah, divine kidnapping. Are humans dragged out of their sin, kicking and screaming against their own desires?
And Spurgeon uses very precise language here to address that exact pushback. He says, there is no violence done to the will.
So no kidnapping.
No kidnapping. The will is not broken or bypassed. The will is set free, and then it is acted upon by a graciously enlightened understanding.
Okay, consider a rescue operation on a freezing mountain. Let's say you're suffering from severe hypothermia, which causes confusion.
Right, you get delirious.
Yeah, you actually think you are warm, so you are taking off your coat and burrowing into the snow. You are actively choosing to freeze to death. Your will is dictating that you stay in the snow.
You want to be there.
So a rescue helicopter lands. Now, if the medics just shout out the door, hey, we're leaving, come on in, you will ignore them.
Because your will is corrupted by the cold.
Right. They have to come out, wrap you in a thermal blanket, and administer warm oxygen. And as that warmth hits your brain, the confusion clears.
The enlightenment.
Yes. You realize you are freezing. You realize the helicopter is safety. So they performed a medical intervention that enlightened your understanding, and as a result, you willingly and eagerly climbed into the helicopter. You weren't dragged.
That's a perfect analogy. Spurgeon actually uses the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis for this.
Oh, right, with Jacob.
Yeah. Joseph is the prime minister of Egypt, and he wants his elderly father Jacob to come down from the land of Canaan to survive the famine.
So he sends a call.
He sends a call, but Jacob is an old man. He cannot physically make that brutal desert journey on his own. The call alone would be frustrating. It would just make him sad.
Right.
But Joseph sends wagons. The call is accompanied by the means to obey the call.
Oh, I love that. The wagons.
Spurgeon notes it was not only an entreating call, but an enabling call. When Jacob saw the wagons, his spirit revived. He wanted to go, and now he actually had the strength to go.
Because God does not drive his people out of Egypt with a whip. Nope. He leads them out like sheep. Spurgeon points out that God supplied the grace to eat the paschal lamb, the strength to strike the blood on the doorposts, and the resolve to leave the land of leeks, garlic, and onions.
Which was a miracle in itself, honestly. The Israelites were brutalized slaves. They were making bricks without straw, getting whipped daily. But their natural inclination was to cling to the familiar misery of Egypt because the food was recognizable.
Instead of stepping out into the freedom of the unknown.
Yeah, and don't we do that? We constantly prefer a familiar dysfunction over a terrifying freedom. So this enabling call, these wagons of grace, they provide the enlightened understanding to finally let go of the leeks and onions and just walk out.
But then, once they're out of Egypt, the rescued people need to be sustained. Like, they are free, but they are damaged.
Deeply damaged.
So God's care expands beyond just holding a child's arms. He becomes Jehovah Rophi, the Lord who heals.
Spurgeon points out that we do not just have weakness that needs support or, ignorance that needs tutoring. We have deep-seated, dangerous diseases that need actual medicine.
He calls it a heavenly pharmacy, right?
He does. He says we have a sickness for every day of the year, but the beloved physician has a remedy for every complaint. He is addressing the reality of ongoing spiritual infirmity here. We aren't brought out of Egypt in a state of sudden, flawless perfection.
We wish we were.
Oh, definitely. But we carry the injuries of our slavery with us right into the wilderness.
And Spurgeon also uses this imagery of removing a heavy yoke. He says, God is to them as they that take off the yoke on their jaws, like oxen who are finally allowed to rest.
Right, with the bearing rein loosened so they can stand at ease and eat substantial meat.
A bearing rein forces an animal's head up, preventing it from lowering its neck to rest or eat comfortably. It's terrible.
Yeah.
And God removes that artificial strain. But this brings up an interesting critique Spurgeon makes about his own day.
Oh, the pastoral critique.
Yeah, he notes that some under-shepherds, pastors, and teachers are afraid of laying too much doctrinal food before the people. They want to keep the diet light.
There is a massive fear of overfeeding believers with robust, heavy theology.
Why do you think that is? Why the reluctance to teach the deep stuff?
I think the assumption is that people are tired. They had a hard week at work. They just need a quick motivational thought, maybe 5 practical tips for a better life, and an uplifting song.
Right.
The fear is that if you give them heavy doctrine, you will overwhelm them or drive them away.
But Spurgeon pushes back on that hard.
He does. He says that fear comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of what truth actually does to the soul. Spurgeon says, truth never surfeits, though it always satisfies.
Surfeits meaning?
To surfeit means to make someone sick from overindulgence. So you can eat too much physical meat and feel nauseous, obviously, but you cannot consume too much divine truth and become spiritually sick.
So treating people like they can only handle superficial motivation is actually treating them like they are fragile.
Yes, rather than treating them like starving adults who need genuine sustenance.
And to illustrate the sheer volume of grace God provides, Spurgeon references this classical myth, the Greek myth of the giants stacking Mount Pelion upon Mount Ossa in an attempt to reach heaven.
But he flips it.
He flips it. He says God piles blessing mountain upon mountain, Pelion upon Ossa, so that believers can climb out of the depths of their distress.
It's a superabundance of fine wheat, marrow, and fatness. The doctrines of the word are substantial meat for hungry souls.
So the very thing some leaders withhold, this deep, complex theological truth, is the exact medicine the beloved physician prescribed to heal those deep-seated diseases.
It is, but, and this is a crucial, but while there is a superabundance of truth available, God administers it with incredible pastoral wisdom.
What do you mean?
Well, when Israel walked out of Egypt, they were not a well-regulated state. Spurgeon calls them a mob of slaves, unfit for self-government.
A mob of slaves, that's blunt.
But true, they had been institutionalized for generations. They did not know how to manage freedom, how to organize society, or how to trust an unseen God.
So God chooses Moses as their leader. Not a military dictator, not a fiery revolutionary with an axe.
No.
But Moses, who the text calls the meekest man on the face of the earth.
Because dealing with children of 60 requires immense patience.
Children of 60, I love that phrase.
You can teach a 6-year-old child because their ignorance is natural, right? It's innocent.
Sure.
But teaching a 60-year-old adult who acts like a toddler, someone who is set in their ways, prone to complaining, demanding, and fearful, that requires a completely different level of forbearance.
God knows this mob is utterly terrified of their old taskmasters. Like they hear the rattling of the war chariots at the Red Sea, and they just panic.
They totter like babes ready to fall, Spurgeon says.
But God doesn't just tell them to be brave. He doesn't just say, buck up. He physically slays their old fears. He uses the plagues to break Pharaoh's power, and he uses the Red Sea to drown the Egyptian army right in front of their eyes.
It is a decisive, visible destruction of the stumbling block.
And later, before they enter Canaan, God sends hornets and pestilence ahead of them to weaken their enemies.
Right, because he knows their faith is in its infancy. He knows if they face the full strength of the Canaanites immediately, they will break. He is gently persuading them to trust him.
It's like, think of the wilderness years as a massive kindergarten classroom full of tangible visual aids.
Visual aids, yeah.
When you walk into a kindergarten, you see bright colors, massive blocks, felt boards, physical objects you can touch. You do not hand a kindergartner a dense textbook on string theory.
Yeah.
You give them an apple and an abacus to teach them math.
That's a great analogy. The symbolic worship of the ancient Israelites was a religious childhood. I mean, they saw the morning and evening lamb sacrifice. They ate the physical manna. They drank water that literally leaped from a rock.
Sensory.
Entirely sensory. They saw the pillar of fire at night. They saw the high Hibbikist with the glistening Urim and Thummim on his chest. It was entirely a sensory religion because they were not capable of reading the plain sense of spiritual truth yet.
They needed the pictures in their books.
Exactly. Spurgeon calls these symbols the horn books of infancy.
What's a horn book?
A horn book was this wooden paddle used back in the day with the alphabet and basic prayers written on it, covered by a thin layer of transparent animal horn to protect it from sticky fingers.
Oh, like a toddler's board book today?
Yes. It was the absolute basic primer for a child learning to read.
So Spurgeon levels this massive critique at the religious impulses of his day, which honestly applies to ours as well.
Oh, absolutely.
He points out that some believers constantly crave these physical signs. They want the ornate robes, the burning incense, the physical manifestations, the guaranteed visible miracles.
He says they are like big babies crying to get their horn books back when they have already been given the clear, open manifestation of the Holy Spirit in the person of Christ.
We aren't in the religious childhood of the wilderness anymore.
No, we are called to spiritual worship. We walk by faith, not by sight.
It's like someone graduating with a literature degree but demanding their parents read the Lutham board book with a fuzzy bunny on the cover because it feels safer.
That's spot on. It's a regression.
God provided the sensory kindergarten because it was necessary for a mob of slaves learning to walk. But the goal was always to grow them up.
The shift from sensory religion to spiritual worship is the mark of maturity. And just as God physically held up the nation of Israel with those visual aids and protective miracles, he intimately manages the spiritual physical therapy of every individual believer today.
The physical therapy of faith.
Yes. Spurgeon takes the nurse metaphor and applies it directly to the individual here.
And he breaks it down into specific steps, right?
Right. First, the nurse puts her hands out and lifts the child from the dust before the child even thinks of walking.
That's the initial uplifting. We were groveling in the dust, completely passive, and the divine power of the Holy Spirit exerted itself upon us to stand us upright.
Then second, the nurse allows slips and bruises to teach the child weakness. A baby has to tumble a few times to learn balance.
Makes sense.
Third, she regulates exertion by giving only small promises to grasp at first. And fourth, she uses pleasant things to tempt the child to walk further.
I really want to look at that third point, regulating exertion. Spurgeon points out that a wise nurse doesn't let the child put too much weight on its legs at first because the bones and ligaments are tender.
If you force a toddler to walk a mile, you will cause lasting injury.
But this kind of connects back to the fear of overfeeding we discussed earlier, doesn't it? Albeit with a nuanced difference. Before, we said truth satisfies and does not sicken. But here, Spurgeon issues a strong warning against overloading young converts with deep doctrines.
He mentions predestination or union with Christ specifically.
Right. So if God has all truth, and all truth is good, why does he hide some of it from young believers?
Think about it like this. If you find someone who has been famished in a desert for weeks, and you bring them to a massive banquet buffet, you do not let them eat 5 plates of heavy meats and rich desserts immediately.
Right, they'd get violently ill.
The food is entirely good, but their stomach will reject it. The shock to their system could literally kill them. You give them broth, you give them easily digestible nutrients, slowly.
Or like, if someone has been trapped in a pitch-black cave, you do not pull them out and stare them directly into the midday sun.
They'd be blinded.
Yeah, you cover their eyes. You let the ambient light filter in slowly, or their optic nerves will be agonizingly overwhelmed.
That's it. Spurgeon says, "Did we know at the first all we shall know hereafter? We should be so overwhelmed with the abundance of the revelation that we should not be able to endure it."
God lets the light in by degrees.
He only gives a trembling new believer a few simple promises to hold on to. Something like, "Whosoever calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved."
Which is a small, sturdy chair for a toddler to pull themselves up on. You don't hand the toddler a complex theological treatise on the mechanics of the hypostatic union.
No, you give them the clear, solid truth of a Savior who welcomes sinners. Spurgeon says God tempers the wind to the shorn lamb.
Wow.
He holds the believer under the arms so they aren't strained by trials meant for mature knights of the cross. A toddler is not sent onto a desperate battlefield. They are kept in the nursery until they build strength.
But a crucial part of building that strength involves the necessity of weakness, right? The slips and bruises.
Yes. Spurgeon makes this really sharp observation about human nature. He says we are never wise until we discover that we are fools. We are never strong until we confess that we are weak.
It's the paradox of the gospel.
Those broken resolutions, those moments where we try to walk in our own natural self-reliant strength and fail miserably, those are the necessary tumbles. The Heavenly Father allows them because they cure us of our pride.
But the metaphor of the human nurse and the toddler starts to break down a bit here.
Yeah.
Because the human nurse has a relatively straightforward task with a willing toddler.
God faces unique, stubborn disadvantages when teaching us to walk.
And this brings us to what Spurgeon calls the hereditary disease of trusting the flesh.
Because when you watch a human toddler, their primary motivation is a desperate desire to walk.
Yeah, they want to be like the big kids.
They watch the adults, and they want to mimic them. They pull up on the coffee table, they let go, they fall, they cry, and then they immediately try again. They are eager participants in the process.
But believers have a double task to overcome. We don't just have to learn to walk, we have to unlearn terrible walking habits.
Yes. We already have an established way of navigating the world based on our own strength, our own pride, and our own resources.
So the task of infinite mercy isn't just planting a new tree, but cutting down the old one and rooting it up.
We are completely blown out with self-sufficiency. A toddler never asks the nurse for a pair of stilts.
Right.
The toddler trusts the nurse's arms. We, on the other hand, are constantly seeking crutches. Resting on an arm of flesh is what Spurgeon calls the hereditary disease of God's people.
We are terrified of the simple walk of faith, leaning alone upon the invisible.
It goes against our nature.
Think about learning to swim. The text explicitly mentions people going into the sea to learn to swim, but refusing to take their feet off the bottom of the ocean floor.
I've seen people do this.
Right. You can paddle your arms all you want, you can put your face in the water and blow bubbles, but as long as your toes are gripping the sand, you are not swimming. You are standing in the water pretending. You cannot stand and swim at the same time.
Because the buoyancy of the water will only hold you up if you actually surrender your weight to it. As long as you are keeping one foot on the bottom as a backup plan, you aren't trusting the water. You are trusting the sand.
So for you listening, what are your golden calves? What are the crutches that prevent you from the pure walk of faith?
Spurgeon lists common ones. He says we want a favorite child to lean on, a husband, a wife, a friend.
We lean on our own abilities, our bank accounts, our social status, anything we can see and handle.
And he actually takes it to an institutional level, which is fascinating. He points out how entire masses of the Christian church prefer an adulterous alliance with the state rather than relying on the faithfulness of God.
Wow. Adulterous alliance.
Yeah. They are afraid to trust God with the maintenance of their ministers and the support of their worship, so they look to political power or government funding as their crutch.
Because they want the visible security of earthly authority.
Yeah.
Trusting the invisible stream of God's abundant faithfulness just feels too risky to them.
We want signs. We want evidences. We want guaranteed outcomes. We want political leverage. We want anything other than resting on the covenant promise of a faithful God.
We demand our stilts.
You do.
But if we are the stubborn, if we constantly reach for crutches, if we insist on keeping our feet on the sand, and if we continually tumble back into our old, self-reliant habits, why doesn't the divine nurse simply give up?
That's the big question.
Because a human nurse gets paid by the hour? If the patient is entirely uncooperative, eventually the physical therapist discharges them. They write in the chart, patient refuses to comply, and they move on to someone who actually wants to heal. Why does God keep holding our arms?
Because the reason for God's endless patience is relational. We aren't just patients in a divine clinic. We are still his children.
And Spurgeon tells a story that captures this dynamic perfectly.
The mother of the criminal.
Yes. He talks about sitting at a table and listening to a mother expatiating about her son. She is praising him, seeing all these wonderful qualities in him. And someone leans over to Spurgeon and whispers, "Wish that woman would be quiet. Her son was transported. He was a terrible criminal.
Transported, meaning he was convicted of a severe crime and shipped off to a penal colony.
Right. So he was, by society's standards, a complete failure. But when Spurgeon brings this up to the mother later, her response is striking. She says, if there's nobody else to speak up for him, his mother always will.
She loved him so much that she focused entirely on whatever was hopeful in him.
And Spurgeon applies this stubborn parental defense to God.
He says our blessed God does not bring into the foreground what we are, so much as what he means to make us. God says, their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more forever. God actively hides our flaws.
Which reminds me of that historical reference Spurgeon uses about Appel's painting Alexander the Great.
Oh, the portrait.
Right? Alexander had a massive, ugly scar on his face from a battle. When the artist painted his portrait, he didn't want to paint the scar, but he couldn't lie and paint a perfectly smooth face. So Apelles painted Alexander resting his head on his hand, with his finger subtly covering the scar.
Spurgeon says the Holy Spirit does this with our flawed attempts at righteousness. He points to the story of Sarah in the book of Genesis.
What did she do again?
Well, Sarah laughs in disbelief at God's promise and then literally lies about it. But when the New Testament looks back at Sarah, the Holy Spirit does not highlight the lie. The Spirit highlights the fact that she respectfully called her husband Abraham, Lord.
So God accepts her poor, faltering service by placing his finger over the scar of her disbelief.
Yes, God focuses on the hopeful elements. He accepts our limping, stumbling walk because he is looking at us through the lens of Christ. He sees us as we shall be when we bear the image of the heavenly.
And this realization of God's fatherhood is an intensely practical anchor in times of suffering. Spurgeon actually shares a deeply personal anecdote right at the end of his sermon.
About his gout.
Yeah. He talks about a time when he was suffering from extreme physical agony. Spurgeon suffered terribly from gout throughout his life, causing pain so severe he could not bear it without crying out.
The racking pain is so intense that he asks everyone to leave his room. He just wants to be alone.
And he prays. But he doesn't pray a polished, formal, theological prayer. He pleads with God based purely on his character as a father.
He says, "Thou art my father, and I am thy child, and thou as a father art tender and full of mercy. I could not bear to see my child suffer as thou makest me suffer, and if I saw him tormented as I am now, I would do what I could to help him. Wilt thou hide thy face from me, my father?"
He calls it a Luther-like prayer, holding God to his revealed character. If you are a father, show yourself a father. He's essentially telling God, my own human parental instincts would not let my child suffer like this without offering comfort. You are infinitely more merciful than I am, so please help me.
And Spurgeon testifies that faith mastered the pain by laying hold of God in his revealed character. The pain subsided. The childlike appeal, "Father, help me," rising up from the darkest, weakest moment, was heard because the relationship is firm.
A mother cannot forget her nursing child, and God will not forget his people.
He has their names engraved on the palms of his hands.
It reframes the entire process. Every stumble, every removed crutch, every piece of divine physical therapy is administered by hands that are permanently scarred with your name.
Which brings us right back to that opening image from Hosea chapter 11.
The arms of God holding the stumbling believer.
We started at the ancient riverhead, the underground aquifer of sovereign, electing grace that guarantees the love was there before we ever took a single step.
We watched those enabling wagons of salvation roll into Egypt, providing the enlightened understanding to willingly leave our bondage behind.
We saw the beloved physician applying heavenly pharmacy to our deep-seated diseases, and the meek tutor guiding a mob of 60-year-old children through a sensory kindergarten in the wilderness.
And we examined the gentle, regulated physical therapy of our daily faith, where God continually works to wean us off our worldly stilts and our hereditary reliance on the flesh.
Covering our scars with his finger, just as a stubborn parent defends their child.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over on your own this week. We spent a lot of time discussing how God regulates every single stumble to teach us our own weakness and how we stubbornly cling to our crutches. That what if the ultimate goal of the universe isn't a flawless, independent performance on our part, but the highest demonstration of divine mercy?
What if?
If God's glory is most vividly seen in his stooping, in his nursing, and in his constant upholding of the weak, perhaps our eternal state won't be one of absolute self-sustaining perfection. What if eternity involves a perpetual, joyful dependence on the Father who never stops holding our arms?